Mobility management on regional level. The essence of transport is movement of people and goods and also energy and waste to a more desirable location. So the movement of people, the reason of this movement is the basic human activities: to sleep, to learn, to work, and to supply the household, to socialize, has been geographically split to different and distant locations. Movements from home to work and to learn are called commuting and are of the primary interest of Green Path project. Traditional approach to transportation planning for decades was, if there is a travel or transport demand, the only task for transportation planner is to provide the supply, enough capacity for all travelers and deliveries. This is called supply-oriented planning. But this approach has some threats, particularly new supply creates new demand, and soon there is a new need for new capacity, and this is called induced demand. We create a vicious circle until we hit spatial, financial, and environmental limits. When supply-oriented planning clearly hits its limits, a smarter approach is certainly let's influence the demand. This is called demand-oriented planning or mobility management. The traffic planner has several options for what can be influenced by planning measures, such as let's change the time of travel, not in the peak hour. Let's change the modality, use public transport, bicycle, let's walk. Let's change the organization of travel, known as sharing and pooling of vehicles, bicycles of course. Let's change the destination of travel. Let's choose another route. Other planning and organization sectors can support sustainable mobility by online working, so encourage commuters not to travel at all. And long-term travel behavior can be influenced, of course, by smarter spatial planning, by so-called cities of shorter distances. Some measures that declare themselves as sustainable are to be discussed. The just change of the energy supply of my private car is appreciated, but not really sustainable. Digitalization is not necessarily smart, so slowing down investment into traffic infrastructure is often seen as a threat for economy in general, and particularly for the civil engineering. So, demand-oriented planning, there are two basic approaches to influence changes in travel demand. The first one is so-called pull approach. The idea is to pull drivers out of their cars by designing the desired mobility option more attractive, like incentives for cheaper public transport or public transport for free, encouraging cycling and walking, travel awareness rising, developing multimodal information in real time as much as possible, introducing seamless ticketing and mobility as a service solutions. So the other option are so-called push measures. That means make the use of private car as a driver less attractive. So these measures are like all kind of charging, stalling, congestion charging, parking charging schemes. So all kind of taxation, particularly based on polluter pay principle. The next possible measure is capacity reduction, for example, converting road lanes into dedicated lanes for public transport, or speed limitation accompanied by enforcement. So, in the European Union, the process of putting the principles of sustainable transport planning and management into practice already has a certain tradition. So the basic guidelines, how to do it for the designers of the guidelines was to prepare a strategy that would not be another strategic document in a drawer that decision makers and citizens would take seriously. To prepare a comprehensive mobility strategy and not just an addition to an infrastructure supply-oriented transport strategy. The geographical scope of these guidelines was mostly urban-oriented or urban-limited. The geographical scope of these guidelines was mostly urban-oriented or limited by definition. A SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, should cover the entire functional urban area, taking into account real traffic flows. A functional urban area consists of a city and its commuting zone. So, functional urban areas therefore consist of a densely inhabited city and a less densely populated commuting zone whose labor market is highly integrated with the city. So, commuting zone contains the surrounding travel-to-work areas of a city where at least 15% of employed residents are working in the city. The open question in some European countries is: functional urban area is very often not the same as political body. How to approach the development of a regional sustainable mobility plan? There are different options and situations to define the most suitable region for the regional mobility plan. Is it some of the NUTS level? NUTS stands for Nomenclature of Territorial Unit for Statistics. Or is it so-called Great Urban Area? Sometimes there is no dominant commuting center in the region, so we have so-called polycentric regions. And to make it easier for the data collection, sometimes statistical regions are the most suitable option, as on the case of Slovenia, for example. There is also a need to develop mobility strategy for vulnerable regions, as the Alps, for example. We have some examples. In Slovenia, for example, we don't have region as a political body, so statistical NUTS 2 regions were chosen as mobility regions. In 2022, the Transport Planning Act was adopted by the Parliament, and this introduced regional mobility plans as an obligatory strategic document. It introduced regional mobility centers with a task to coordinate the development of regional mobility plans. Since they have no own regional financial sources, the State Ministry ensured the financing of the regional mobility center and the budget for the development of regional mobility plans until 2028. Parallel to the regular framework guidelines were published, there are more or less adjusted European guidelines modified for local conditions. In the meantime, first regional mobility plans were published. One example is the regional mobility plan covering the Alpine region and addressing mostly tourist issues. The other example is a regional sustainable mobility plan for Carinthia region, which is focused on commuting. So some conclusion: regional mobility planning and management are implemented and developed in very different ways across Europe. In some countries, the practice is already well developed. In others, much less. The Green Project should help fill this gap. Thank you.